Okay, no problem.
Okay, thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the fourth webinar hosted by Blytheway and Wardell Armstrong. We thought for this week's soiree into the mining industry, we'd look at the interest in nickel, or certainly the resurgent interest in nickel that seems to be taking place at the moment. And to do that, we've got a mixture of panelists. We've got several panelists who are involved in both the exploration and production side of nickel, and then we also have a look at we're also going to have a look at the market side of things towards the end of the presentation. We're going to try and keep the whole session to 1 hour in total. There will be opportunity for participants to put in questions to the speakers, and hopefully, given time, we'll be able to address some of those later on. Without further ado, I'm going to kick things off. So my name is Phil Newell. I'm the MD of Wardell Armstrong International. And the first speaker is Nick Barkser. Nick Barkser was or is still Oriole Resources, who have been looking at the Shevchenko nickel laterite projects in Kazakhstan. And I'm actually going to start the presentation because back in the day when this was all happening originally, which in the early 2000s, Wardell did a lot of the initial works on this project from the resource and the mining standpoint. So literally, I'm going to be a couple of minutes introducing the project, then I'm going to bring in Nick to talk about the very important processing aspects. Then Nick will be followed by Mike Oxley from Brazilian Nickel, who will be talking about, I guess, similar sort of project, but obviously in a very different environment. Then Geraint Harris from Alta Zinc will be talking about their nickel cobalt interest. And then finally, the whole session will be finished off by John Mayer, who will be looking more at the markets and the nickel issues themselves. And then I think Tim Blythe will be giving closing remarks to this session. And as I said, I want to try and keep things to a tight time scale. So most presenters have got around about 10 to 15 minutes. Tim, please.
Phil, we will allow questions after John's done his bit as well.
Yes, we will. Sorry. I mean, the idea is we'll do the questions at the end. We should have time to take questions. Right. Without further ado, I will get my presentation on the screen. And away we go. Bear with me. Come on. Right. I hope people can see that. Okay, Shevchenko Nickel Project, Northwest Kazakhstan. Well, this was, as I say, looked at back in the early 2000s, but prior to that, the Russians had, in the usual inimitable Russian style, had done literally thousands of drill holes across this nickel laterite, and they'd come up with an original resource estimate in 1952 of sort of 100 million tons plus, with 700,000 tons of nickel, 51,000 tons of cobalt. This got Oriole Resources interested, and during the early part of the 2000s, they undertook some pretty extensive resource drilling, sort of 18,000 meters of confirmation and infill, bulk sampling, trial pits, and culminating in a positive feasibility study in 2005, which used an RKEF pyrometallurgical process undertaken by Batemans in South Africa. And at that time, a new M&I resource of 107 million tons, 0.84 nickel, was produced by Wardell Armstrong. Since that time, global markets have changed for nickel. John's going to talk about this later on in more detail, but obviously there is still a huge amount of interest in stainless steel across the world. But of course, nickel is becoming a more and more important part of the whole battery metals story. And partly, or because of that, nickel prices recently have taken a kick up. I haven't looked today to see what it is, but certainly the markets are pushing stronger. And I think there is an expectation that process will continue. Very briefly, the deposit itself, it extends over quite a long lateral area, 36 kilometers long by 5 to 6 kilometers wide. There are 8 mineralized zones in total, but most of the mineralization is actually is in the first two, Shevchenko and Tarasov, which are the big ones. And the ore bodies are generally about 1 to 35 meters thick, but between 0 and 50 meters from surface. So in reality, they are extensive. The issue comes, like with all nickel laterites, in the composition of the mineralization of these things. Now, the general succession you see at Shevchenko is a topper ochre zone, followed by a non-trinite and non-trinite serpentinites beneath, then leach serpentinites below that, which grade down naturally into the weathered serpentinites themselves. The picture you can see there is one of the trial pits that was excavated. I think this one is at Shevchenko itself, and you can see some of the nickel grades that were coming out. But like a lot of nickel laterites, the idealized section is the one I've given you. You look at the photograph, and that's actually in reality what these things look like. So they're never quite as simple as they seem in textbooks. The part of the feasibility study looks at a open pit scenario, which came up with a reserve of sort of 104 million tons at 0.79, 0.8 nickel, using a 0.4% nickel cutoff. Generally very shallow slopes, bulk densities are low on this commodity, and it was designed to use a fairly small trucking fleet, sort of 50 tons. And you can see on the picture on the left-hand side, just showing you how the production was scaled up, with a large part of treatment taking place once all the ore had been mined. So from a mining standpoint and from a geological standpoint, the Shevchenko project is relatively straightforward. But like all nickel laterites around the world, the difficulty is within the mineral processing of these assets, because each one is different and each one tends to have its own problems. And I'm going to hand over now to Nick to tell us a little bit more about the processing side. When I stop sharing and let Nick open his. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Phil. I'm just trying to get the screen share to work. It seems to have disappeared. There we go. Screen share. There we go. And you see the screen?
We do. Yeah, that's great, Nick.
Good. Well, welcome to this next presentation, and thanks, Phil, for the introduction. I've been with Oriole for, I think, since 2004. We've successfully developed a chrome project, and the nickel project is still in waiting. And if we go through the presentation very quickly in the next 10 minutes, just to say that Oriole is still based in London, and it was acquired by Metral, so delisted in 2008. And our primary focus has and still currently is development of natural resources, mostly around nickel, and obviously the chrome resources, which have been sold to a Turkish company. Obviously that was a successful outcome. Our office in London is also supported by the Kazakhstan Nickel office in Kostanay in Kazakhstan, and they've been working with us all this time. So the project itself, if we go back to the original start, was aimed at a 30,000 ton per annum nickel in ferronickel project, which is still the base case. And the product from that is a 20 to 25 nickel grade, very much standard in regard to what the stainless steel industry requires. But since those times, and during the 2008 to 2014 era, we started to look more intensively at nickel intermediates, following the lead from projects like E-Nickel of BHP Billiton in Turkey and many others as well. And we certainly realized that this intermediate could not only produce advanced chemical products, but would be an ideal feed material for producing a very high grade ferronickel, because actually our sister organization in Russia had already been producing a similar product. So we knew there was a good market for that. One of the cardinal, let's say, building stones for the project is the block model developed with Wardell Armstrong, as referred to by Phil. And we believe, even though there is extensive Russian data, this coupled with the strategic and technical aspects of the geo-mining metallurgical processing technology, which we've got very well packaged and are continuing to use, as shown in the last bullet point there, to interact with potential stakeholders who now own some of the exploration license to support the development of what we believe is a worthwhile nickel project. I think Phil has largely covered those, so all I'm going to say is that really the objective is to continue with the project based on that very good foundation developed with Wardell's and advance it further, looking at 3 flow sheets. The first one is the one that was developed together with Bateman, now part of the International Tenova Group. They have exchanged communications with us that they're fully in support of taking this project forward. And although it shows only 3 twin electrode DC arc furnaces. Since the time we started the project, ERG has built a chrome smelter with 4 furnaces of a similar size and of a similar type. So the credibility of the technology, even though there is always a learning curve established in Kazakhstan, is probably ahead of most of the rest of the world. So it's a good place to follow on now as a second player, not the lead. The nickel intermediate is the second case, and it can be processed at the same, amazingly, at the same capacity of 30,000 tons per year in a much smaller furnace. And the schematic of the furnace is shown on the right. It's only 12 megawatts, not 380s. So the amount of electrical energy you need is significantly less. And that furnace has actually been installed very close to Kazakhstan in the southern Urals, and would be very well suited to being used for this purpose. And then thirdly, there are new technologies emerging which even use less energy, and the ESS furnace shown there on the right, time won't allow to go into details, but Dr. Lawrence Erasmus, who I believe is on this call, certainly could answer any questions you may have in that regard. As always, starting with the feed materials, we would like to compare the MHP calcine with the Shevchenko calcine, and you can see the nickel oxide is nearly 70% in the one case and only 2% in the other. And that is over 30, maybe 35 times higher in the intermediate. And that is the fundamental reason why you need such a small furnace, relatively speaking, to produce the same amount of nickel. It fundamentally changes the landscape of the overall approach. And the mass and energy balances have been done, again, very well by Lawrence Erasmus, and shown there for a single furnace at 10,000 tons of nickel, and then for the 3 needed to get to the 30,000. Plus, as you can see there. And on the right is the fairly complex looking flow sheet, which is an advancement on the RKEF process that Phil mentioned, and is really the state of the art technology for the process. Many aspects have been fully demonstrated, so the plant, I think, can be designed and built even more cost effectively than we originally looked at in 2006. Now, in terms of the leaching options, and I'm certainly not the specialist on that, I think Mike Oxy will address some of these. While I very much like the idea of in situ leaching because it avoids having to dig up the material, we tried at Shevchenko some preliminary in situ leaching test works, and it was an absolute disaster. Now, I know there are other projects in Kazakhstan that are indicating potential success, but I have serious concerns. One of them was blockages in the underground piping in less than 3 weeks, and also how do you control the leakage of the leachate into the groundwater? You know, I don't know how you manage those. If somebody finds a solution, we'd certainly look at that. Heap leaching is our preferred option. It's widely practiced in Kazakhstan. In spite of the cold winters, there are ways to do that. And technology to optimize resource utilization using the block model and the technology is now much more advanced. And we haven't really taken that all the way yet. Atmospheric tank leaching was looked at very extensively, and it is a reasonable alternative to heap leaching, but we rule out HPAL. Most of the HPAL operations face significant challenge, and some of them are shut down as well. So we're not really considering that at this stage. So to move to the second case, based on the leaching, and preferably the heap leaching, you can see again, it's 30,000. It's reduced at 82,000 megawatt hours per ton. And the furnace on the right is the one under construction in 2012 in the Southern Urals, which is operated on local calcined ore. But as I said, it would be an absolute winner with the calcined intermediate. Very similar mass balance, but the energy for the S furnace is 1/5 at less than the 80, it's 18,000. So it's about 1/5 of the energy consumption for the electric furnace, and it's emerging technology for the future. It could also be used for the ore directly as well, but we haven't included that. So let's get down to the wire. And this is a fairly recent techno-economic study, not down to the financial modeling done by Mike Freeman, who was involved in the original project back in 2004 to 2006, and still has worked on many nickel laterite projects. And on the basis of a reasonable assumption currently of 15,000 tons, $15,000 per ton, and those consumable costs seen there, we come up with close to a 40% return on investment. Obviously, if we do more financial modeling, we can get to the NPV, etc. And you can see that that both the intermediate product flow sheets with the furnace and the ESS, the DC furnace, are not that far behind. And in fact, I think they could, with a little bit of further integration and development, very closely get to the same as the furnace. So we're going to have a difficult choice, all positive, and which is the winner. So in summary, the 80 megawatt furnace option is still there. It still remains the base case. Atmospheric heap leach can still be looked at, but certainly a tank leach would be the preferred option, and alternative ESS to make MHP, and the synergy of potential nickel and cobalt chemicals could also be looked at. So to conclude, our recommendations are to do an updated study of the base case and then look at the MHP cases with the nickel either in the 12 megawatt furnace or the S furnace. And those case studies could be carried out fairly quickly based on all the work that was done. And the cornerstone of that is the Wardell block model that's already developed and can be adapted with the chosen flow sheets for a strategic and then a financial comparison. So thanks very much for listening to this very quick review, and happy to answer questions as and when they are sent to us.
Thanks, Nick. It's great to see quite a bit of work has taken place on the project since we kind of last had any input to it. And I at the time when we were looking at Shevchenko, very much liked the project, but for obviously various reasons back in the day, it just didn't happen. And I think with the way the markets are going, this is a project that definitely has a bright future, whether it's now or in 6 months or in 2 years, who knows, but it does have a future without a doubt. Nick, thanks. If you can unshare your screen, please.
I'll do that.
Okay, so on a similar but different theme, Mike, would you like to tell us what you're going to talk about today, please?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I shall share my screen as well if I can. And there we go. So hopefully you can see the screen. So I thought I'd take some inspiration for this small presentation from Elon and the Blytheway team that have entitled this "Please Mine More Nickel." But I thought we'd just better take a little closer look at what Elon actually said about nickel. And I think the key words here really are, the need to mine nickel efficiently and in an environmentally sensitive way. This is not just a concern of Tesla, but a concern of many of the original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs that are producing electric vehicles, and all the other nickel applications are increasingly looking at the supply chain. So I just wanted to say a little bit about us, Brazilian Nickel and the Piauí Nickel Project. We're located in the northeast of Brazil in the state of Piauí. And this is an advanced project that we acquired from Vale back in 2013. Around about $85 million has already been spent on the project, bringing it through the geological exploration stage and into development. One of the things we acquired from Vale was a pilot plant that they put together. And we took that pilot plant, which you can see in the background, and did a 8,000 ton demonstration. And we call it a demonstration plant because we weren't really piloting. We were there to demonstrate the technology of heap leaching as applies at Piauí. So those heaps that you can see are 4 meters high, which is the full height that will be used in the full-scale production. And for that, we're targeting 25,000 tons a year of nickel and some byproduct cobalt, which will be contained in an NHP, a nickel hydroxide product, which can feed both stainless steel, but also the increasing market for electric vehicles and energy storage systems. We've recently been funded, so we're now entering into the bankable feasibility study stage for the full scale. But we're also looking to expand the existing demonstration plant, which has done its job for the feasibility study by providing the information. But we can turn this into a continuously operating unit with some extension of the pads, some extra ponds, a few extra bits of equipment. And that would put us in a nice position as a junior mining company to be able to be in production, albeit at a small scale, producing about 1,400 tons a year of nickel, but giving us some revenue, giving us some cash flow as we go forward and finance the full scale production. Going back to those two key words, efficiently and environmentally sensitively, we would state that that there are certain inherited advantages to nickel laterite heap leaching. It is a very simple process, and I like to describe it as using really gravity and 4 simple chemical equations that do most of the hard work. I mean, the gravity itself is basically related to the percolation of the solutions through a heap, and then the continued running of those solutions eventually into a precipitation plant. You know, that's energy that we don't need to create. It's energy that we can just use effectively for free. And then we have our 4 simple chemical reactions. I mean, clearly there's a dissolution of the metals in the rock using dilute sulfuric acid. And when I say dilute, you know, it's less concentrated than some cleaning products that you can find you know, for bathrooms and so on around the world. If you got it on your hands, it's not going to hurt, but you better wash your hands afterwards. So it's very dilute. And the process of dissolution in the heaps is effectively removing everything that's in there except the silica. In POE, we actually have quite a large amount of silica, at or about 50%. So we have half of our rock that will not react with the acid. But all of the impurities, as well as the nickel and cobalt, will effectively dissolve. And we'll look a little bit about how that can be managed in a bit. Once we have the solutions containing all these elements, we utilize the fact that increasing pH of an acidic solution of metals in solution selectively starts precipitating metals in a well-known and understood order. So we begin by raising the pH just with limestone, and this brings out the iron, some of the aluminium, and also the gypsum that's formed by the reaction between the limestone and the sulfuric acid that's remaining in the solution. Thirdly, we then precipitate the products, having passed them through an ion exchange unit to do with further purification and potentially split the nickel and cobalt so that we can produce separate products, or if we prefer a combined product. And this is again simply raising the pH with magnesium oxide in this case. And then as the final step, our final chemical equation is to add lime to the solution to remove the remaining magnesium. And then we are able to recirculate the now more or less pure process water back into the system to be reacidified and used again on the heap leaching side of things. Now, all of this happens at ambient temperature and pressure. We don't have any complicated machinery. And this has allowed us to employ mostly local labor, you know, in areas often where the levels of education are minimal, because we're not dealing with sophisticated equipment that requires much more training. And we're lucky in Brazil that for those other skills that we lack, where more skill is required in terms of electrics or maintenance or mechanics, and the engineers themselves are freely available. There's an interesting side to this as well, in that the sulfuric acid that we use will be made by burning sulfur in a sulfur burning acid plant. And this exothermic reaction allows us to heat water, create steam, and generate electricity, which in fact is more than we need for the project. And this we're able to sell back into the grid. And one of the important things, particularly at moments in Brazil and other parts of the world, is that all our residues are solid. In effect, we're trying to manage solutions which have nickel and cobalt in through most of the process. So we're very careful of those solutions. And our main residues are the spent ore itself after leaching, and the iron aluminium that comes out of the first neutralization step. And as solid residues, these can be stored and rehabilitated very easily. In terms of CO2, which is of course an important consideration, we're already quite low, a lot lower than many other nickel processes, but there are opportunities that we're looking at, and again using chemistry to see if we can't reduce our CO2 emissions and even make them negative by doing some different precipitation stages, particularly towards the end in magnesium control, where we have the ability to perhaps produce a magnesium carbonate, capturing CO2, and that as an insoluble carbonate is a good store chemically of CO2. The simplicity of the process and the use of gravity and chemistry to our advantage means that we have low capital and low operating costs. And let's look a little bit more detail at some of the secrets of getting this right. If it's so simple, why is this not being done all over the place? Well, there's many different aspects. And Nick touched on some of these earlier on in terms of the understanding the geology of a nickel laterite. They are different and they change a lot over short distances. Understanding that and how it fits with the processing is very important. And there are many other variables that I've listed here that you need to get right. It's not just a matter of knowing that you need to crush, but to what size are you going to crush? What methodologies are you going to use to take account of the nature of the ore? Agglomeration, is that required, yes or no? And if so, how is it going to be done? What are the binders? What are the targets for that operation? Because that links to the height of heaps that you may decide to use, to the irrigation rates and methods, and the acid strengths that are employed. And all those other things that I've listed all have an interaction with each other and must be properly understood. And this is one of the things that the Brazilian nickel team has been working on since 1999 in Turkey, in the Philippines, and in Colombia. And as such now, we feel that we've reached a position where we're able to maximize the efficiency of the heap leaching process. Going back to the question, environmentally sensitive, well, we've put in place a sustainability management system that deals with a lot of aspects of all aspects of the issues that are facing the industry, from the clear health and safety, which has long been a priority in the industry, but including an environment and community, and increasingly governance in the areas of anti-bribery and corruption, our diversity and inclusion policies as well. We have a system that all of these things fit in. It's driven from the top in terms of the standards that we aspire to from our sustainability charter down through the specific HS and ESG policies for which we have input from the IFC performance standards and other groups, including the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. These drop down to be codes that we apply in each of our local companies, where they will develop the specific policies and procedures that can be followed step by step for the various activities, from preparation of a site during construction through to how we manage the various things such as groundwater control and air quality and so on. And these, of course, link also to our financial and HR policies and procedures. Really taking our responsibilities in this area very seriously and clearly and obviously doing something about it. So to wrap up, although I haven't touched it on in this presentation, when Elon says mine more nickel, well, there is plenty of nickel out there. And yes, it can be mined efficiently and in an environmentally sensitive way. But as has already been alluded to, the mining perhaps is the easy side. It's the processing and also producing the right products for the relevant market, be they electric vehicles or energy storage systems. And we would say, yes, it can be done both efficiently and environmentally sensitive way. So Elon or anybody that makes any of these products that require nickel, I would say to them, well, this group here, please just get in touch.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. A good message, of course, a good message. And that tied in very nicely with Nick's presentation about Shevchenko. And it's good to see, if you like, two nickel laterites at different ends of the spectrum. One in Kazakhstan, which is sitting there still waiting to be developed, and another which is effectively up and running. And but as we've both said, it's all down to the chemistry of these things. How do they actually behave when you try and process them?
Absolutely.
And that's the million-dollar or multi-million-dollar question. Let's put it like that. So and now something completely different. Geraint Harris, Alta Zinc. Geraint, come in, Geraint, and tell us about what you're up to.
Hello, Phil. Thank you very much. Well, thanks very much for the invitation. We're, as you say, we're slightly different to the other projects here in two ways. One, that we're, as you can tell by the name Alta Zinc, we're predominantly a zinc exploration company with an asset in northern Italy. But we've also got a second asset in northern Italy called the Gorno project, which is cobalt nickel. The difference here is it's hard rock, not laterite, and it was mined in the mid-1700s for about 70 plus years. So obviously with pretty basic technology, but they made it work. And processing is yet to be determined by us, but it was a simple processing methodology back in the day using gravity separation, similar to tin. In the future for this project, once we prove up a resource, I imagine this will be using simple flotation technology. This is a view of the project here. We've got pretty much 50-50 cobalt nickel. It looks like mineralization, even split in the rock. And it's a series of narrow, high-grade veins. And you can see the red lines here demonstrate where those veins are indicated. The topography is relatively mountainous, but obviously, as you know, for underground mining, that can be an advantage. So without further ado, let's tell you a little bit about the company. I'm the managing director. My background is as a mining engineer. I've spent a lot of time in base metals and also gold. And my most recent company before this was Adriatic Metals, so based in Bosnia, another exploration company listed on the ASX. We're also listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. We've got a very strong board and a good split of skills in the management and board. We've got a strong Italian team and of geologists and basically the team that deals with all the in-country logistics and work and regulatory work that we're undergoing now. And we've got a head office in Perth. I'm based in the UK, so I'm equidistant. I'm close to site, but I can also get to Australia to service the market fairly easily. We're well funded with $4.5 million in cash, end of the last quarter. And as you can see there, you know, our market cap is modest but growing. Final thing to say here is directors and management hold the largest single stake in the company. So we've got a lot of skin in the game. Our last capital raising was at 0.4 cents. Today we're sitting at 0.6 cents. That capital raising was at the end of June, and we management and insiders put in $650,000 of a 1.6 million raise. So we're very, sorry, 3.6 million raise. So we're very well funded to continue the exploration. Now, let's talk about the projects. As I said, we've got two projects. Really, this is a pipeline of Italian assets. So we've got the Gorno project, which is the lead zinc, and that's our principal project, being taking the most of focus and the budget, and that will continue going forward. But what's coming on stream now is a greater pace at our Punta Corna project, which is the cobalt nickel asset. Both are in northern Italy. You can see it indicated here by the red dots, and they're about 4 hours drive in between. These two slides, what they show is where our market is. On the right, we know that Europe is very well situated for the refiners and the smelters. These are the base metal smelting firms in Europe: Boliden, Glencore, Trafigura / Nystar. What people don't know so well is how much activity there is in the market. I'm sure John May is going to talk about this later, is how much activity there is regarding battery metals. And this is just a sample of the battery plants which are being put into production in Europe. And you can see it's, you know, it really is an incredible investment that's going on now. That's focused on EVs. Obviously, battery plants, they need lithium, they need cobalt, they need nickel. And so we think we're very well situated in a market which will have strong future demand. And also we're strategically situated right in the heart of Europe with very good supply and logistics chains. Now a little bit about the project. This is a plan view. And you can see this project is, we've got two licenses. I'm going to talk about the southern license, which is Punta Corna. We have a northern license called Barme, which is largely unexplored. So that's the next section we're going to move to as we advance Punta Corna. Punta Corna was mined, as I said, started in the first golden age of nickel. Is that an oxymoron? I'm not sure. But nickel back in the day was mined, cobalt was mined as a pigment. Nickel really wasn't used. It was a byproduct, But what we're seeing in our sampling is a very, almost a parity, a 1-to-1 cobalt nickel split. There's also copper and silver in the deposit as well. And really the way to think about this is a series of steeply dipping parallel veins, which are relatively narrow, quite like a narrow vein gold mine, which, you know, the European market, the UK market will be quite familiar with. We've got, you know, on the small single scale mine, Scott Gold, which has successfully been permitted as under development in the National Park in Scotland, narrow vein gold mine, and Dalradian Curranaut deposit in Northern Ireland, multiple veins like this, large strike extent, both in very environmentally sensitive areas. And the key there is narrow vein gold mining is very low material movement, very likely to be the same thing here. Small material movement, high margin. And you can see these dotted lines show the extensive nature of the veins. We've got in here some, basically a swarm of veins in between the main veins that has potential to increase the metal load. Our grab samples are grading in around, you know, 3% cobalt, 3% nickel. In some areas, 6% copper, 600 to 900 grams a ton silver. But, you know, that's our grab samples. We've got a table down here showing that. What we're yet to do is drill this to bring this into a resource. So it's a very exciting early stage project. It's, as you can see, there isn't a lot of value shown in the company by this project, but we hope that and think that will change as we move forward and demonstrate a resource here. We have a lot of confidence in doing that because we know that in the early part of the 20th century, a 50-ton bulk sample was taken in about between 1920 and 1930, and they went up and they remined a lot of these veins, reopened them, took 50 tons out from all the veins together, created a bulk sample, and that graded between 0.6 and 0.7% cobalt. They didn't report the nickel, the copper, or the silver, but we can see from our ratios, we would expect significant nickel on top of that, plus copper and silver. And the historical stopes were mined by very selective manual mining methods. So these were men going in there with a hammer and a steel and using gunpowder to blast it out. So they didn't need to make these stopes any wider than the mineralization. And what we can see is those stopes are between 1.2 to 2 meters wide. So we think, you know, materially, you know, good widths for modern mining, we hope. A section through the project now shows this blue line, and you can see really the two things: how extensive and how continuous this swarm of veins are. But secondly, up on this here where I've noted where the portals are, this is the extent of the historic workings. So really very little, they just scratch the surface from what we can see as a geologic potential here. So they, historically, they mined portals in multiple levels, which if you think you're using basically a cold chisel and a hammer and gunpowder, that would be a serious undertaking. Same on the other side of the mountain of the San Giovanni portal, Santa Maria portal, and then they mined an outcropping trench up on the other side of the valley. So really, we've been able to identify mineralization down to almost 400 meters of depth. Not a drill hole has never been put into this project, and that's what we will intend to do in due course. A little bit about the geology. I'm not going to overstep myself. I'm not a geologist, so I won't talk out of my pay grade here. But as you can see here, these are some examples of the underground stopes. Very good rock conditions, stopes still open, very continuous, regular shapes. There's me, you know, I don't know how wide I am, probably about a couple of feet. And you can see the mineralization there is nice thick stope mineral. There is some residual mineralization in the sidewall, which is shown in some of these samples. Skutradite, which is a cobalt nickel mineralization, and erythrite, which is a weathered cobalt mineralization. Plus we have tetrahedrite and chalcopyrite being the main copper minerals. If you want to find an analogy for this deposit, we're going to be a primary cobalt nickel deposit, very similar to the Bouazer mine, which has been operating since 1928. That's situated in Morocco. They're, I think, the 9th largest producer of cobalt. I'm not sure about their nickel numbers in the world, and but they're actually one of the highest grade. So they're mining 1% cobalt, 1% nickel, plus precious metals. The geology of our deposit is very, very, that's the nearest analogy you'll find is the Bouazer mine. So where are we in terms of location? What's Italy all about? These two areas, the two red dots are our two projects. Punta Corna is shown in the Piedmont region here, highlighted in blue. People don't know much about the mining and resource extraction industry in Italy, but it is vibrant. There's, you know, where we are in Piedmont, there are 229 other operating, you know, mines at the moment, and they're extracting a combination of fluorite, cement, marl, rock salt, really a lot of industrial products associated with the ceramics industry. We're going to have the resurrection, we hope, of two metal mines in Italy. Italy's had a long history of metal mining, and we really hope this will be the first of several. Our project status at the moment is more mapping and analysis. We've done a field campaign this year, and the results from that will be coming out between now and Christmas, I hope. And then the next stage for that Punta Corna project is to permit a drilling program and then get drilling, we hope, next year. In the meantime, we'll be running a remote sensing campaign using some satellite imagery, and we will also then look at doing the same type of on the ground geologic mapping and sampling campaign in the northern half of our license at Balme. Italy is a very favorable location. So not only is it, you know, has it got a lot of resource extraction there, but it's also, you know, it's an industrial brownfield area where we're operating. We've got, you know, there's a very strong industrial base to be able to source logistics and supplies for a mining or exploration campaign. We've got good transport infrastructure, and as you can see there, the fiscal code is very beneficial for a miner, and obviously political risk extremely low. So this is to leave you some of our contact details. This is a three-dimensional view, so you can visualize what the veins we think will look like. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Geraint. Sounds like a job for some Cornish miners, this one. Nice narrow veins.
Exactly.
Right, last but by no means least, John Mayer. Let's see what you've got to say, I guess, about the market side of things.
Yeah, hi. Good to be here. I'm just going to share this screen. Hopefully share the right part of it. Am I sharing the right thing there?
Yeah, put it onto a slideshow, which is the bottom. If you go down, no, that's it.
Yeah, okay. So just talking about the nickel market, there's the disclaimer, so you all know what those look like. I just thought I'd put up some slides here to show, to remind us where nickel comes from and what it's used for. So it's fairly well spread around the world in terms of where it's produced. Some years ago, most of us will remember Inco and Falconbridge, big producers, Norilsk, and then of course the new guys on the block, not so new these days, but the nickel laterite guys, the high pressure acid leach production out mainly in Australia, the big projects such as Goro in Indonesia, and of course the Chinese are now mining and smelting more nickel in Indonesia. And Indonesia has been a very interesting place from a nickel perspective because of its changing policies, in that they banned the export of nickel laterites at one stage, I think there's a little bit of that going on, but they were effectively forcing the Chinese to build their refineries in Indonesia. And at a similar time, the Chinese decided to clean up things environmentally. And the idea of smelting low-grade nickel ores in China, which is a highly polluted process, just wasn't really in accord with trying to clean up China, which was a good thing in many respects. So looking at the uses of nickel, well, I think most people will know that most of it is used in stainless steel. When nickel prices go very high, the Chinese do tend to change the mix of nickel and chrome in stainless steel cutlery and things like that. Much of it goes into infrastructure style projects. So when you're building urban rail systems, such as the new Elizabeth line running through London, and of course a lot of the infrastructure going into China, where there's a huge amount of local rail systems, suburban networks being built. There's several drivers for that. One is that China wants to lift more people out of poverty. They've realized with the coronavirus, it's more important than ever to continue to urbanize the population. So they've got better control on sanitation, for example, and how and where people live. And also, what's perhaps less known is that the princelings of the Chinese Politburo, or shall we say members of the Chinese political elite, as no doubt Donald Trump would call them, they make a lot of money out of land deals where they're able to buy urban land or near urban land at vast discounts, and then they're able to develop that land or sell that land on. So these are discounts that other Chinese people don't have access to, and this is how they make a lot of money. Of course, the value of that land is then improved significantly as soon as there's a plan to put in a local suburban rail system or other infrastructure. So that's just a bit of background, but it is, shall we say, I'm sure it's a driver one way or another. But back to the uses of stainless steel, and it was alluded to, the uses of nickel. Yes, stainless steel is a big one. And in fact, stainless steel production capacity is growing, and it's growing so fast in China at the moment that in fact the futures market is pushing stainless steel prices lower, knowing that there's more production capacity coming into the system. So as prices go lower, hopefully the demand will increase and that new capacity will be taken up. But of course, the more stainless steel is produced, the more nickel will be consumed in that. So I think nickel's share of that stainless steel pie will increase a bit over the next 6 to 12 months. But what we're also going to see is that the battery demand is going to increase, and I'll go on to that in a second. In that pie on the left-hand side, you can also see that China is the major consumer. So we see this with so many metals now. China, Japan, South Korea are big consumers. Of course, they're making products that are then consumed around the rest of the world. So if we look at forecast nickel production, we reckon that's also going to rise, and not just our own forecasts, but these are forecasts that we construct using the information coming out of all areas of the market. So it's not just a demand picture. There is new supply coming in to meet demand. Here's a go at the market balance. Of course, it's always a very difficult calculation to get right, and I thought I'd bring this up front just to give you an idea of what we're thinking. So we are expecting a small surplus this year. I mean, clearly there's been an interruption to consumer demand through the lockdowns and this and that, but as we've seen, manufacturing has recovered very fast in many parts of the world, particularly China, where there is a greater proportion of it than anywhere else. And what's going to be very interesting is as we create longer term forecasts on the market balance, where that goes. And I think we're going to have to revise that market balance surplus to a smaller surplus for this year. And I think it wouldn't surprise me if we headed into losses, into a deficit for next year. But it's much is still to be known in a very volatile global marketplace. So if we move on to one of the key drivers that we look at for the next few years, batteries are clearly new technology, batteries in electric vehicles, and there are a lot of different variables in this. So we're looking at different battery chemistries, how much metal's in each of those individual batteries, what the size of the battery packs are, and I've got some more charts on this, so I won't dwell too long on each of these things, but there's a lot to talk about here. So the NMC, most people are fully aware of NMC 811 and 622 batteries. There's more 622 batteries being made at the moment because it's quite well established technology. 811's a bit more tricky. That's 8 parts nickel to 1 part cobalt, 1 part manganese. But that is a faster growing segment. And you can see the purple bar here is the nickel component. So nickel is most of the weight in the battery. And these battery packs are very heavy things indeed. And that's why they put them right in the bottom of the car. Well, for a number of reasons. And the average battery pack is running around 50 kilowatt hours. That's come down a little bit. And there's a big materials cost in there as well at about $52 a kilowatt hour. It depends on who you're talking to and what commodity prices you plug in. I think those material costs have gone up quite a lot in the last couple of months. So we'll be looking more at that. So here I just referred to the different types of battery chemistry. The 622 is the major battery in use at the moment, and the 811 in the top part of that bar is on the right hand side is growing fast. We saw a big jump in electric vehicle sales in the last month, and in fact the sales have been running quite well through the year. If we look at that here, EV battery demand started off at what are we looking at, 10,000 megawatt hours per month a year ago. We recently had a 42% rise. This is adding in passenger vehicles and buses and coaches and all sorts of stuff like that. And given that there's been some major problems associated with lockdowns, actually the recovery is looking very strong. So EV sales about 2.5 million units this year. It is accelerating. We reckon that it's about 18 gigawatts of batteries sold or consumed in the market this year. If you compare that with one of the charts we saw earlier of new European planned battery capacity at 500 gigawatts, that'd be 500 gigawatts a year. We reckon that 18 gigawatts uses something more than 60,000 tons of nickel. So if you extrapolate that and you start selling cars with 500 gigawatts worth of batteries in them, then you'd be looking at about 1.7 million tons of nickel just being taken up by the electric vehicle production alone. Now, I'm not going to say that's a hard number because it's not. It's very much back of the fag packet. But there are problems with that. Well, it's not problems. There are going to be many issues because battery packs are probably going to get a little bit smaller for passenger cars as people buy more smaller vehicles. But on the other hand, a big part of the EV market is going to be SUVs, things like the Tesla Cybertruck, which are going to have much bigger battery packs in it. And let's face it, people who buy those Cybertrucks are probably going to go for the extra range and this, that, and the other. So you might see 75 kilowatt battery packs going in there. And okay, they're heavier and they'll have a lot more metal in them. So it's not an easy calculation to know. The other side of it is, and I was going to put some charts in, but I haven't yet, is Tesla's new battery, the 4860 battery format, says it's going to have 5 times as much energy and 6 times as much power. Now, they also say it'll only have 16% extra range, and that doesn't quite figure with me. In fact, when we look around, Evaluation Engineering reckon it'll give you a 54% increase in range, which sounds a bit more like it. Now, that battery is more condensed. It's a bigger physical battery, so it's a heavier battery, but of course it will give more power. So although I think 500 gigawatts a year of new batteries could be 1.7 million tons a year of nickel, it's probably more likely to end up something smaller than that, maybe only 1 million tons of new nickel demand. But with more efficient batteries coming into the market. But even finding another 1 million tons of nickel a year is going to be very difficult in the tight market that we see ourselves in. And it gets worse than that, because there's an awful lot of grid power storage that's been developed almost by accident, because Elon Musk developed the Gigafactory before he really had fully developed the market for selling his Tesla vehicles. So they couldn't produce enough vehicles for the number of batteries that they were making. They also knew that some of those early batteries weren't necessarily the best batteries in the world, and they didn't want to put them into the cars, which are their premium product. So they put these batteries into grid power battery packs. So battery packs containing thousands of these cylindrical cells, the 1860 cells that we all know and love. And then they sold a lot of these into California, where there's quite a lot of renewable power programs going on, and where California was a big test site for these sorts of things. Sadly, a few of them caught fire, but most of them seem to perform quite well, and they're very good for suddenly switching in power, because they work on a sort of nanosecond scale, which is really good for grid use. And so what we're seeing is a growing market in grid power battery packs. Now, we like to think that there'll be more and more of these will be replaced by vanadium redox batteries, but when it comes to the very fast switching in of energy supplies, you can't really replace lithium very easily at this point in time. So this is just in relation to lithium-ion batteries within that mix. There are different other types of battery technology used, but you can see here that lithium-ion batteries are the dominant came through as the dominant technology a few years ago. You can see if you look at forecasts for storage deployments, it's yet another one of these. It's almost a hockey stick curve. So very, very fast growth here. The target till 2030 is 266 gigawatts. So not as much as for the electric vehicle market, but still another significant market for lithium and other types of grid storage battery. This just shows the mix of different types of batteries used in grid storage. And that's the end for me. So hopefully I've given you guys a flavor of what's driving the battery for nickel, and the challenge for the nickel market in how to actually meet the new demands for electric vehicle and grid storage supply.
Okay, John, thank you very much for that quick oversight there, and obviously very, very interesting, and lots of unknowns that we're all going to be dealing with in the years to come. I mean, the main unknown, of course, that everybody appreciates is, that's the technology as is known now. Who's to say what gets thought of and invented in the next 6 months or the next 12 months? But it's fascinating stuff. And I mean, all these arguments about whether you've got the right metal mix in your batteries, I mean, a lot of it is driven to a certain extent a bit by the Betamax syndrome, isn't it? That I think no manufacturer back in the day wants to be stuck with a technology which in 2 or 3 years' time is proved to be complete and utter useless compared to what's out there. So but none of us, I guess, have experienced this in our working lifetimes in mining, because mining is a pretty conservative standard process, which, as you heard from Geraint there, they'll still be talking about using probably manual mining methods to extract their nickel cobalt from their operation, and that's just the way it is. But batteries is a whole different ball game. So thanks very much for that, John. We have a couple of questions. I think we've got time. Got 2 or 3 minutes before we finish. Mike talked about, participants, can you see these questions?
Yes.
No.
Right. Can you, the first one there, regarding to the ESG concerns, anybody like to pick that one up other than Mike, who obviously talked about it himself in his talk? Nick Boxer, by the way, has had to leave us. He had to collect his wife. He had a sort of an emergency to deal with. So apologies for that. Anybody want to pick up the first question? I guess it's about global high ESG standards. It's a bit
Yeah,
of a
Phil, I can talk to you. We had a guy from Volkswagen in our office a few weeks ago when we weren't in lockdown. He spent a week in our office looking at various projects, and because he's part of their sort of new battery buying team that they have, and he was stressing how important the ESG and CSR aspects are to the European manufacturers, and they really don't want to buy any material that could have come from non-ESG, CSR compliant businesses or regions. They are so concerned about it that they really do want to ensure that they meet the strictest of requirements. And it was the thing that he sort of left us with. The main lasting impression is everything has to be squeaky clean these days.
Yeah, I'll certainly concur with that. I mean, a lot of our work as consultants is focusing exactly on that area for whatever commodity, not just nickel we're talking about now. It's people want to, generally, the population wants to ensure that their metals that they're dealing with have come from reliable and environmentally, socially friendly sources. But that's sometimes quite difficult to achieve, as the battery metals story is telling us now. Anybody else want to add to that one before I bring up the other question that you can see there?
Well, just briefly, we saw from John the dominance of China in refining of nickel and other battery metals. We saw from Gerrit, that a lot of the customers in Europe, and these are probably the ones driving the ESG requirements. Now, I think that the European people that are buying the nickel and other battery metals need to recognize they need to start moving a little bit further upstream and looking at the refining that they may need to do to avoid it going through China and getting a better control really of their supply chains coming in. And part of the problem, as many of us will know in the industry, has been the lack of financing for mining companies to go ahead and do these things. We're quite capable of doing them, but the end consumer, the OEMs, need to start really thinking very seriously about whether they want to start investing into the mining industry, which has been short of capital for perhaps the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anybody else want to add to that?
Well, we see these figures of so many billions of euros being pushed around. It doesn't really require billions to seed some of these mining companies to get going. So it's only a matter of time when funding is diverted into, so we say, some junior companies to encourage them to do more in the nickel, cobalt, lithium space. I mean, I think, look, nickel is clearly the big metal from a consumption perspective and a weight perspective in the battery packs. But there's also going to be a problem with lithium supply as well if they're not careful. So they need to get a move on with that.
Okay. Quick question. Somebody's saying issues with higher nickel content in batteries leading obviously to spontaneous combustion, which you touched on, John. How is this being managed? Well, again, I guess nobody here is a battery expert, but John, do you want to have a quick step?
Yeah, we have visited a number of battery facilities, and they also do quite a lot of battery destruction to test these things. And while we were there, there was a battery pack from a Nissan Leaf, because they had produced a batch of packs with the extended range battery that had heat problems, and they put a heat management system in there, and that was what's called a large pouch cell. It looks like a stack of a sort of A4 block of paper in effect. Tesla got it right, probably more by chance than by anything else, because the heat dissipation out of the cylindrical cells worked better. And the new format battery that they're making is the size that it is, because if you make it bigger, you then start to have problems with your heat management within the pack. So the airflow past the individual cells, cylindrical cells, works better than the large pouch cells, if I can call them that. So I think we're going to find more manufacturers going for the larger cylindrical cells and maybe away from the pouch cells, unless somebody can really solve that problem. We know companies like Talga are producing better quality anodes, and we know companies like Vasarion are providing graphene for testing on anodes to make these things more stable, more long lasting and safer. So there's loads of technology going in. It's just and they are improving. And I haven't bought an electric vehicle yet, partly because I think the batteries are going to get better in the next few years. And I would advise everybody just to hang on a bit, because you know what? Much better to buy a car with a battery that lasts twice as long, charges twice as fast, and doesn't catch fire.
Funny you should say that, John. That's exactly my thoughts on life. I'll be hanging in there a little bit longer just to see. It's that Betamax scenario again, isn't it? You don't want to be the one buying that one. Anyway, I think. Oh, wait a minute. There's another. Just had second one there. Okay, here's a good one. How many successful nickel heap leach projects are there globally? And where can I find a paper on these different heap leach operations if one exists? That's an interesting question. Mike, one to you, I guess, there.
Yes, in fact, I believe there's a paper by Nick Boxer and my wife, Anne, why heap leach nickel laterites out there, which is available on our website, which covers this. So I would just go to the Brazilian Nickel website and have a look. And if you need to know more, just get in touch with me directly.
Do you know what the answer is, though, to the question? How many working nickel?
Yeah. There's been two others that have been in full-scale operation. One at Murrin Murrin in Australia, alongside the HPAL there that they ran for a number of years, and one in China whose name escapes me, as well as a number of development projects in Colombia, Turkey, and the Philippines that I mentioned previously. The POE project would in fact be the first standalone nickel laterite heap leach. And you know, my little rant earlier on about funding is sort of partly related to that. And you know, you mentioned that the nickel, well, the mining industry in general can be quite conservative, and we've had to fight against some very fierce headwinds to get this far. But you know, I think we will be demonstrating this with the early production from the P&P 1000 project, as we call it, again, so that everybody can see it.
Okay, thank you. Right, no more questions. Tim, would you like to close the session out?
Thanks, Phil. Well, it just falls to me to thank Nick and Geraint and Mike for walking us through their projects. To thank John Mayer for giving his time and giving the market overview, while at the same time managing to publish his morning note, I see, during the entire presentation. Well done, John. Great multitasking. To thank the Wardle Armstrong, Tom, the IT team, for bringing it all together and making us all be able to talk with each other and do the session. And also to Beth Payne and Naomi Holmes of Wardle Armstrong and Blytheway for pulling it all together. That's it for this session. We'll look forward to seeing people in the next one. Who knows where lockdown's going to take us, but I think we've enjoyed doing these sessions. We'll probably carry on doing them. So if you remember, if you're drilling holes or building mines, talk to Wardle Armstrong. If you want to tell people you're drilling holes or building mines, come and talk to Blytheway. That's it for today from us. So thank you to all the people for joining us. Have a good day. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.